ささんさんてらっサンシャインハイサイのスマイル
Talio there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the show. Now let's have a look at the MacBook Pro 15-inch and how it performs specifically against the XPS 15, its main competitor there. And if you're an Apple fan, you might as well hit that dislike button now, because you're probably not going to like what you see. And definitely hit that thumbs up button if you like a reviewer who's straight down the line, kick you in the nuts, tells it how it is. And if that's the kind of reviewer you like, then baby, I'm your man, yeah. That was Georgie Boy, R.I.P, what a legend. And yeah, that was my Greek mate, by the way, and he's very Greek if you know what I mean. And of course, Greeks are famous for democracy and souvlakis. I don't know what you were thinking. Anyway, let's have a look. Now, first thing here, let's go through Cinebench. So Cinebench R15. Now, on the left, you have the XPS 15. On the right, you have the MacBook Pro 15-inch Radeon 455 graphics card. Now, what you'll see there is the CPU test. You'll see 681 on the XPS 15 versus 694 on the MacBook Pro. Now, this is exactly what you should see because the MacBook Pro is clocked at 2.7 gigahertz, so it should have that little bit of difference there. There's not much difference between the two. As you can see there, correct scores. That's how it should be. And on OpenGL, you can see that the XPS 15 has a higher score, 81 to 79. Well, you will see pretty much every graphics benchmark apart from one. The Dell XPS 15 really does beat the MacBook Pro. So we'll just call that even then. It's pretty even. It's not much difference. So next test, let's go to Geekbench. Now Geekbench is typically a benchmark that goes long enough to actually make the CPU's throttle. So there might be a little bit of difference here that the MacBook Pro does throttle a little bit. But overall, I would say the difference is here. As you can see, the XPS 15, 4,283 versus 3,655 on the MacBook Pro 15-inch. There's a fair difference in performance there. You know, we're not talking about 100 there, we're talking several hundred. So, and then on the multi-score, you see the same sort of thing, 13,000 on the XPS 15 versus 12,569. That's a bit closer on the multi-core. Now, as I said, a little bit will be down to the throttling of the MacBook Pro 15-inch, but basically, this flies in the face of everything Mac owners will tell you. And I am a Mac owner from way back. I've had more Macs in the last 10 years than I've had PCs. And in 2015, before I switched to an XPS 15, I was using a Mac. So I consider myself still a Mac user. I would have bought this 15-inch MacBook Pro if I thought it was worth its money, but it's not. That just simply comes down to optimization, because on Cinebench the scores are virtually the same. Now that's just 100% pegging the CPU, and that just tells you the raw speed of the CPU. But with something like Geekbench, it does a lot of different tests where it opens and closes HTML pages and all these sort of things where you ramp up the CPU will go down or ramp up again. And as you can see, it gets a high score on the XPS 15, even though it's a slower clocked CPU, because it's more efficient. It is more optimized, and the Mac is not that well optimized for the Skylake processor it's using. And typically that's true Mac versus PC. The PCs get more out of their CPU than the Mac does. They are more optimized. You can imagine Intel, when they optimize their CPUs before they go out, 90% of their optimizations is done on Windows. They're not going to mess around with Mac so much because Mac engineers do their own thing anyway, and it's just a small, like 5% worldwide market share. So let's have a look at OpenCL scores here on Geekbench. As you can see, on the left, the XPS 15, on the right, you have the MacBook Pro. The MacBook Pro is faster, but I expected it to be much faster, seeing that AMD and the Mac really like OpenCL, and that's pretty much their chosen API for graphics. And I was expecting there to be a bigger margin in between the two. And that just basically tells you that the GTX 960 in the XPS 15 is a much better graphics card, because anything OpenCL, AMD and Mac should be way ahead of the Nvidia card. Roughly 1,000 difference between the two scores. You're talking something like, you know, that's only around 2%. And as you'll see later when we're doing graphics tests between the MacBook Pro and the XPS 15, using the same software, using the same API, you will see that the XPS 15 is of a magnitude faster. And we're talking, you know, 30-40% in some cases, whereas this, it's like 2% difference. And this is a benchmark that definitely favors the Mac. So let's get on to the bad news now. And what we have here is Unigine Valley. They are both using OpenGL. So I didn't put DirectX on the XPS 15. On the left is the Mac. On the right is the XPS 15. Both 1080p, both same settings, OpenGL. And have a look at that. Wow. Now, what's important to know here, if I actually run the Dell XPS in DirectX, you get another 10 frames per second faster. And you can see the XPS 15 is of a magnitude faster. So let's go to another app that's on both Mac and PC. So same app, same settings, 1680 by 1050, OpenGL on both. And look at that, a massive score difference between the two there. 27 frames versus 41. And remember, if you use DirectX 11 on the XPS 15, you get another 10 frames or so. Here again, the MacBook Pro is absolutely getting smashed. And this is the current model XPS 15. Got to remember, there's a Kaby Lake and GTX 1050 XPS 15 that has just been announced and will be released any moment. When that comes out, it will absolutely obliterate the MacBook Pro. Like, this is already of a magnitude faster, the XPS 15 in these tests. You can imagine what's going to happen when you get a Kaby Lake and a GTX 1050 in the next XPS 15. So let's have a look at some gaming benchmarks. I don't know, the Mac isn't for gaming, but the reason why I tested these on these games is because these games are both on Mac and PC. So let's go to Rocket League. So Rocket League actually plays pretty well on the Mac. Here you can just see me playing just a demo game, and you'll see that I'm getting a constant 60 frames per second, and this is at 1680 by 1050 by the way, and I'm getting constant 60 frames per second. That's pretty good, you think. You think that's not bad, 60 frames per second, that's all right. But the thing is, once you actually play online or you actually add other cars into the scene, you drop down a bit. And I was consistently getting around an average of 38 frames per second with 6 cars. So 38 frames per second at 1680 by 1050. But I'll just tell you now, at 1080p, you're doubling the frames per second. You're getting over 120 frames per second at 1080p on the XPS 15 playing Rocket League. So absolutely smashed there. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, Civilization 6, this really surprised me. I actually said in my review of the MacBook Pro 15-inch that it was getting around 12, 16 frames per second at 1080p. Well, it actually wasn't at 1080p. It was actually at 1650 by 1050 because of the Mac's aspect ratio. Some games, they just won't let you select 1080p. So anyway, Civilization 6, 1680 by 1050, you're getting 18 frames per second, the MacBook Pro 15-inch. 18 frames per second at 1680 by 1050. Wow. You know what the sad thing is? On the XPS 15, I can play this game at 4K and it's smoother than playing it on the MacBook Pro at 1680 by 1050. That is astonishing. And this trend pretty much continues on every game, even on CSGO. I was getting in between 65 and 120 frames per second on the Mac, average of 80 frames per second. And on the XPS 15, literally double again. I was getting around 120 to 240 frames and I was getting around 160 average there. So I guess that pretty much sums up the performance. I have a render test between the XPS 15 and the MacBook Pro. I have a screen comparison. You want to check those videos out if you want, but definitely when it comes to performance, there is no other winner than the XPS 15. Anything to do with graphics is just of a magnitude faster, and we're talking about the same apps here, the same apps on both systems, the same APIs. Yeah, it's a pretty big difference there. Anyway, I will be getting a new XPS 15 soon with the 1050 and the Kaby Lake processor. I will again be comparing that to the MacBook Pro and the current XPS 15. Make sure you subscribe to see that. I'm really sad to say, not just for Mac people that like the Mac, but just for me. I mean, I would have bought the Mac if it had 32 gigs RAM and the Kaby Lake in it. I definitely would have bought it. Now I can forgive the graphics card maybe because, you know, you're most likely gonna, if you're gonna use an Apple, you're gonna use the Mac apps, so you won't have to worry about these performance tests so much. But, you know, I like to play games on my computer too. So, you know, I would have liked to play Civilization at a decent frame rate and a decent resolution, and I can't do that on the Mac, and that's unfortunate. But if you live in the Apple ecosystem and all you use is the Apple Pro apps, well, disregard everything said here. It's going to work fine. It's going to work super fast. But if you like to use Premiere, do a bit of gaming and just anything to do with graphics other than the Mac Pro apps, yeah, the MacBook Pro is left wanting in performance there. So thanks very much for watching there, guys. Really appreciate it. If you're new around here, make sure you subscribe. And until next time, guys, tally ho.